look at this. Hello. That is not the appropriate term. Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Tania Fernandez Anderson, the District 7 City Councilor. I am the chair of the Boston City Council Committee on Ways and Means. This hearing is being recorded it is being live streamed at boston.gov/city-council-TV and broadcast on Xfinity Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, and Files Channel 964. The Council's budget review process will encompass a series of public hearings beginning in April and running through June. We strongly encourage residents to take a moment to engage in this process by giving by giving testimony for the record. You can do this several ways. Attend one of our hearings and give public testimony. We will take public testimony at each departmental hearing and also at 2 hearings dedicated for public testimony. The full hearing schedule is on our website at boston.gov/council-budget. Our scheduled hearings dedicated to public testimony was April 26th at 6 p.m. and the following will be on June 2nd at 6 p.m. You can give testimony in person here in the chamber or virtually via Zoom. For in-person testimony, please come to the chamber and sign up on a sheet near the entrance. For virtual testimony, you can sign up using online form on our Council Budget Review website or by emailing the committee at ccc.wm@boston.gov. When you are called to testify, please state your name, affiliation, and residence, and limit your comments to 2 minutes to ensure that all comments and concerns can be heard. Email your written testimony to the committee at ccc.wm@boston.gov. Submit a 2-minute video of your testimony through the form on our website. For more information on the city budget process and how to testify, please visit the City Council's budget website at boston.gov/council-budget. Today's hearing is on dockets 0480 to 0482, orders for the FY23 operating budget, including annual appropriations for departmental operations, for the school department, and for the other post-employment benefits OPEB. Docket 0483, orders for capital fund transfer appropriations. Dockets 0484 to 0486, orders for the capital budget, including loan orders and lease purchase agreements. Our focus area for this hearing will be Boston Police Department, BPD, Part 2, including Bureau of Admin and Technology Operations, Bureau of Admin and Technology, and Admin and Technology, Bureau of Investigative Services, Bureau of Intelligence and Analysis. Our panelists for today's hearing are Lisa O'Brien, Chief of Bureau of Administration and Technology, Chief BAT, or BAT, James Tarantino, Deputy Superintendent BFS, Victor Evans, Deputy Superintendent BIS, Superintendent Jeffrey Wolcott, Chief of Staff, Sharon Dodden, Superintendent BPS, David Carabin, Assistant Bureau Chief, Nora Bastian, Superintendent BPD, Marcus Eddings, Superintendent Details and Overtime, Laura Dickinson, Division Director BCE, Jennifer McConaughey, thank you, Director Strategic Initiatives and Policies. I am joined today by my colleagues, Council President Ed Flynn, District 2, Councilor Kendra Latta, District 6, Counselor Michael Flaherty at large, Counselor Liz Braden, District 9, Counselor Aaron Murphy at large, Counselor Julia Mejia at large. For those of you who joined us, just so you know the format of the meeting, we will allow for presentation. I understand that you the panelists had one presentation, but maybe some opening statements or remarks to initiate this second portion of, or this hearing. If you don't have a presentation and you would like to consider the same, you can go through it again, or you can have open remarks. You will have a total limit of 20 minutes to present. And then we'll go to round one, giving my council colleagues 8 minutes each for questions and answers. It is for them to manage their time. And then we'll go to public testimony in person first, then virtual, and then second round, and if time allows, third round. And again, hopefully we get through this hearing. And then later we would let the department know if we feel that we have enough questions answered and we get all of the responses by email on document for our working session. If not, we would reschedule to bring you back for a third hearing. I'd like to acknowledge that we've been joined also by Councilor Ruzi Louis-Jean at large. And I noticed that we are joined by several youths. And first I want to say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And thank you so much, and peace and blessings to you guys. And thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to your testimony if you have one. And thank you so much for doing your civic duties. All right. So panelists, if you have a presentation, we're ready when you are, or just opening statements. You have the floor.
Good afternoon, Chair Fernandez, Anderson, and the members of the council. Once again, my name is Superintendent Jeffrey Walker, Chief of Staff, and I have with me other bureau chiefs and assistant bureau chiefs, directors. I'd like to assist us with this presentation this afternoon during part two, and we just want to express our appreciation for the important work that we're all doing here as all our agencies, the city officials such as yourself, and along with Mayor Wu and her leadership and commitment to public health and public safety. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. If we're considering the same presentation, then everyone, if you have copies, will go straight for questioning. Okay. So in the order of arrival, Councilor President Flynn, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, thank you to the panelists for being here, for the important work you're doing in the city. Earlier today, I spoke about the need for more police in the city. My concern is that many police are retiring, and we need to fill that void that's been there to make sure that we're meeting the needs of the residents. I highlighted that when I go to an event, a neighborhood meeting, usually the first person that speaks at a neighborhood civic meeting is the police captain from that neighborhood. The police captain gives an update on crime stats and what's happening in the neighborhood. And every experience I've had, the residents thank the police, and then they ask me, and then they ask the police captain, but we want to see more police in the neighborhood. We want to see more police presence in the neighborhood. Bike patrols. So that's what I've focused on, and I'm just concerned about the health and wellness too when we have police officers working 16 hours a day, 5 days a week, the impact it has on them physically and mentally, but also the impact it has on their family as well. It's not a healthy environment. So we're going to continue talking about overtime. We're going to continue talking about overtime for the next 10 years unless we hire more police. And my goal is that we consistently hire 200, 300, I don't know exactly what the number is, at least 200 police officers every year until we catch up. I've highlighted that earlier, but I'm going to move on to another subject. So the other thing I mentioned about is health and wellness is an important issue, just like the military, you need to make sure that your mental health is also a top priority for you and your family. But can you talk, or can someone talk about the health and wellness priorities of the police, of the commissioner, and what the city council can do to be more helpful to make sure that police have access to good mental health counseling?
Councilman Flynn, as I had mentioned earlier today, that within the police department, we have a peer support group, unit that has been established for a few decades now and has provided confidential peer support. Thank you. When it comes to mental health and wellness, but the department has recognized, just as other departments throughout the country, in particular over the past several years with a lot of civil unrests and a lot of incidences involving police conducting their jobs, the COVID pandemic, and police, anti-police sentiment, that there's definitely a need for additional services for our members, not just for the sworn, but also for some of the civilians who also provide certain police services. So yes, I think that the council could come together with us and have with all the emergency services, to be honest with you, and have a group discussion and to be candid as to some of the things that affect us, that we come across or are subjected to or have to deal with on a daily basis. I know when we as Councilman Flaherty had mentioned that, you know, Boston, the city of Boston and its residents is very fortunate to have emergency services that will respond to a call in a matter of minutes, whether it's police, fire, or EMS. But I think that when we arrive, we are focused on doing our job, and training will start to take over. And at the end of the day, we need to decompress. And sometimes that happens when we're off the clock. So yes, a further discussion is definitely needed. And we should talk to everyone from the patrolman all the way up to the command staff, and how best to address those issues.
Thank you, Superintendent. My other question revolves around the cooperation that Boston Police play to other cities and towns in the kind of the greater Boston area. I think it's critical, and I'm thankful that Boston Police plays a leadership role in helping other towns and cities in need, especially during emergencies. That's what a large, big city like Boston does, is works with the neighboring towns and neighboring cities. what have we learned from each other when we assist a town or city? What have we learned from that experience, and how does that help the Boston Police become more experienced in public safety issues, certainly working well with the neighboring police department does, but can you talk a little about just some of the lessons learned and the benefits of that type of an effective program?
Well, we routinely use what we call COBRA, which is it's our citywide bike and our bikes with other bike units, such as Quincy. We've had them from Brookline, Wellesley, Newton, and we put them in packages or platoons or units for the large events and demonstrations, but specifically for large events such as the Boston Marathon, and that has worked well. We need their manpower, and it's valued. On the other side, we train them. We train them on patrol bike techniques and procedures, is governed by the MPTC, as well as crowd control tactics and procedures. So we gain their manpower in that respect, and I think from us to them, they receive the training that they need that they probably wouldn't have gotten anywhere else. Another unit that is used by other departments is our SWAT unit that is routinely used for search warrants by other towns seeking to execute search warrants in Boston, and also as well looking to execute search warrants outside of Boston where they don't have that capability. So there is cross-fertilization or cross-education from both units. I think from our perspective, we like the use of their manpower, and I think that they gain a lot through training from us.
Thank you, Superintendent. Yes, sir.
To that as well. From the investigative standpoint, it's a two-way street. Outside agencies have assisted us in solving homicide investigations. Outside agencies have assisted us with the cyber attack and the ransomware that occurred recently at the Boston Public Library, where we don't have the assets or the resources to do that. So I think the partnerships are great. I think the partnership should continue. And overall, it's been very lucrative and well for the safety and the investigations on part for the residents of the city of Boston.
Thank you, sir. The one highlight of one of these charts, I know my time is up, Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I just want to highlight one stat that jumped out on me. Over the last 3 years, Boston Police, number of firearms recovered in the city, including potential 2022, almost 2,000 for the last 3 years. That's a significant amount of firearms that were taken off the streets. 2,000 guns that would eventually be used to commit a crime. So just want to highlight that important work that the Boston Police and others have done in terms of recovering firearms, getting dangerous firearms off the street. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Council President Flynn. Councilor Lara, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all of you for being here today and for being so gracious. I know that it's a long time, and I found out when I returned that you weren't able to all get something to eat, so we'll work on making sure that you have what you need to be here for the whole day. The questions that I have for my time are about the gang database break, so I'm sure, Director, that they'll come to you ultimately. I want to preface my questions by sharing with you that I was a street worker for 4 years, and I worked under Street Safe Boston, which worked with what the Boston Police Department determined to be the 300 most dangerous individuals in the city. I started in Mattapan on Morton and Norfolk Street, and then I went to the South End to work with the Lenox Street and Villa Victoria groups before that. I was a member of the trauma response team where I responded to victims and family members of people with penetrating wounds, and so I would like you to answer my questions with an assumption that I have some operational knowledge of how BRIC and the gang database works.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you. Can you share with me a little bit about evidence or claims that you have that support that the gang database reduces gun violence in Boston? The more specific and detailed that you can, the better.
I do not have the explicit examples in front of me.
Great.
However,
But they exist.
they do exist. They do exist. The fact of the matter is that the gang assessment database is a tool. It's one of many tools that the Boston Police Department has in its toolbox. The gang assessment database comes into play on a regular basis when we're dealing with incidents of violence that are transpiring on the street. One example I can give you. Within the last month or so, you probably saw reporting of the gravestones that were stolen and
In my
dropped
district.
in specific neighborhoods. We were able to coordinate based on information from that gang database with the district detectives and with field services on where they needed to aim their investigations, also where it was, where field services should deploy resources to curb escalatory violence that was likely to occur as a result of what was going on. We were able to identify the gravestones as attributed to deceased gang members, unfortunately. We were able to then identify individuals from certain open source platforms where things were posted, get that information over to the different units that are responsible for the actual response. That's one example of how that information is utilized.
And
One
I'm
of-
sorry, Director, to interrupt you because I do have a time limit.
Sure.
And so the information exists. I would please
Context.
consider this a request. This is in my district, like I mentioned.
Sure.
Our office has been involved in that. And so, when I ask for questions around the claim that the gang database reduces gun violence in Boston, we've had at least 3 shootings in relation to that. My staffer who works at my office has been shot at while he's walking his dog because he lives in the neighborhood, right?
Sure.
And so this claim that using the gang database, you were somehow able to stop something when people in the neighborhood are being shot at actively,
Sure.
right? I want to see where
Understood.
the information that you're getting. Now, there was a case by the U.S. Court of Appeals, D.S. Ortiz, that found flaws in the database, including reliance on an erratic point system that was built on unsubstantiated references. Again, worked closely with the Boston Police Department. I got the BRIC sent directly to my phone, and so working with young people who are involved, I understand. I know that to be true myself in my use of it. What opinion do you have on that ruling? What work is BRIC doing?
Ahead of that ruling being made, we had taken steps to get rid of the point and value system within the verification process of utilizing FIOs as a sole criteria for entry into the gang assessment database.
And at the other hearing, you shared a little bit about those changes.
Yes.
So those are the changes that were made based on that.
So that is one. Another opinion on that is that there was no opportunity for law enforcement to testify in that.
Okay.
So there were no opinions that were entered into the record on the individual who was the subject of that case in particular. There was no subject matter expertise that was allowed to provide further detail and context behind the criteria that is used. The reasonable suspicion standard that's utilized primarily in the verification process was not allowed to be, again, contributed to that discussion and the ruling of the court.
Are you including testimony from anybody else besides law enforcement in terms of who's considered a gang member? I asked that question because, let's say, Officer George Diaz, who I worked with in Villa Victoria, could say that there's a young man or woman down in the neighborhood who's gang involved, but I spend 40 hours a week down there with them and they're a part of my list, and I'm saying, no, you got this one wrong, and there's, right? So it can't just be law enforcement.
100%. I completely agree with you. What I will say is that our interaction with the social services agencies has primarily been a one-way relationship where we provide information forward. There were barriers that were intentionally put in place for SSYI, and prior to that, the PACT program, that was preventing information from flowing up from those same agencies for reasons of not destroying trust between the
Yes, absolutely.
agencies and the individuals involved.
I'm aware.
I will say, though, that when it comes to putting those lists together, the primary stakeholders from each one of those organizations did have an opportunity to weigh in on the list as it stood and to contribute additional individuals to that process.
Yes, and we were unable to remove, though. So even we did receive an initial list from BRIC that we were unable to edit. We could make additions if our caseload grew, but we were unable to remove people from the list.
Counselor, I'm unaware of that, and I'm sorry that was the case.
So now we know that there's a harmful impact for young people, particularly when they have placement into the gang database. Do you support having a regular audit of the gang database to ensure accuracy and reliability? I know that now we have this once a year reporting and that you've been removing some people from the list. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. Counselor, respectfully, I would disagree with the statement that was made. I would say that we actually create more opportunities for individuals by their placement in the gang database. Operation Exit is a perfect example where jobs are provided to individuals, the health and human services that are offered to individuals that are in that gang assessment database. I've seen statements out there in the public forum that are made of individuals unable to get jobs. That's impossible. It's frankly impossible. That database is not accessible for any employment purposes. The only time I could see somebody potentially not getting a job is if they were applying to be a police officer and it came up in a background investigation specifically in the city of Boston.
It is used in court, though.
Very, very infrequently.
I would go against that. I spent a lot of hours in court advocating for young people there, and their placement on BRIC as an associate of a gang was oftentimes used and presented to the judge for consideration. So I see your statement in terms of creating more opportunity, and I can see why you would say that, but saying that that is the only thing that's happening and that there's not any harmful impact, I think is a long shot. Do you support the removal of individuals' names from the database, juveniles and adults for whom there have been no new records indicating gang membership for the prior 12 months?
That is the current practice.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. What discussions have there been about eliminating or changing the gang database, and who in the city and the community has been involved?
We had conversations with the city council last year as we were going through the process.
Okay.
Some of the former city councilors that are sitting around this table were part of those discussions. So I am supportive of that.
Okay, thank you so much. My last question, and this is more a request for information, if you can't provide it now, I would like a separate list of all the databases that BRIC maintains, databases that BRIC has access to, databases to which BRIC contributes information, and I would like to describe who has access to these databases as well.
Yes, ma'am. We are currently working on that for purposes of the surveillance ordinance as well, which is due out in, I believe, in August. The department's final report will be issued, but absolutely, we'll take note of what you're looking for and get that to you.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. How much time do I have left? Beautiful. No further questions. I just want to say thank you. I do have to leave because I have to get my son off the school bus. But I wanted to let you know because I want you to know that we are respectful of your time and we appreciate how much energy you've put into today. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Council Flaherty, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, everybody. Again, good to see everyone, and thank you for the work you do. Something that's always been confusing to me, and hopefully we can start to have some clarity on it, I guess, is we have captain detectives, lieutenant detectives, and sergeant detectives supervising detectives, and they've never been a detective. It just defies logic for me, and so and it becomes more about who you know and who signs you held and who has the dime and who's got the political connections. I would really love to see, and maybe this is something at the academy level where, you know, I sort of view policing as there's like 2 types of cops, and there could be 10 types of cops, but you have sort of the patrol officer that wants to be sort of sergeant, lieutenant, captain, and be in the district, and then you have sort of Sipowicz, right? You have that someone that wants to be a detective, and we should be sort of fostering both of those, give those that come out of the academy an opportunity to kind of bounce around and be in different districts, which I think what we do, and then maybe someone, and you guys know it better than I do because you guys are police officers, sometime in your career you might want to sort of go down the route of maybe being a detective. And if that's the case, then we should be supporting that detective and allowing that detective to grow within the detective ranks as a sergeant detective, as a lieutenant detective, as a captain lieutenant. We have this system now where you have those that are not detectives are leapfrogging over, and they're now supervising detectives that have never been a detective. No one has been able to sort of, I guess, satisfactorily explain that to me. I see here that we're conducting a detective promotional exam, and we're going to start to obviously encourage folks to take that test, but it just always, for me, it just kind of defied logic as to why that system exists and why we're not enhancing and supporting detectives who I think are overworked and at times understaffed, given the amount of cases they deal with and they have to investigate, plus the old cold case squad. So I know I'm opining a little bit of it, but I can never figure that out. Why in God's name we would have a captain detective, lieutenant detective, sergeant detective, supervising detectives, and they've never been detectives?
Right, well, I was a lieutenant detective, and just
But were
because-
you a detective before you were a lieutenant detective?
I was not. I was a lieutenant DS at B2 for 5 years, and I was a lieutenant detective at B2 for 6 years.
And so then you technically, just for my edification, so you technically bypassed detectives who would love to be a lieutenant detective,
Right,
but you kind of popped in out of nowhere and you,
But you're making the assumption that just because someone's a detective, that they would make a fantastic sergeant detective. That may be true, that may not be true. Now, I would concede to you that the vetting process is not formalized, but I think there is an effort to look at a person, and I'm out of BIS now, but I think there is a concerted effort to look at a sergeant and say, that guy or that woman is a good manager, a good leader, he or she would do a good job, because I think there's a misconception that the lieutenant detective or the sergeant detective is doing exactly what the detective is. They're not. They're managing cases, and I'll defer to Deputy the deputy from BIS, but I think we're automatically assuming the guy's a great detective, he'd be a great sergeant. That may or may not be the fact. I mean, that may or may not be true. But I think my personal opinion, when I was a lieutenant detective and we were looking for sergeant detectives, we were looking for the person that could do the job. And that was the bottom line. The bottom line is, can that guy or that woman do the job? Not, was that guy or woman a detective, or was that guy or woman connected to this or that organization? You were looking for the bottom line. Could that person fulfill the requirements?
and I raise that because in the very beginning of the slideshow under structure, Deputy, that it's a paramilitary organization. So Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, there'd never be a situation where you would have, I guess, the captain of the ship doesn't just plop out of nowhere and become the captain,
Well,
right?
yes.
He's come up through the ranks
But-
as a sailor, as, you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly right. There's a difference between civil service and appointing here, but, I don't want to belabor the point, but I mean, you might have been a fantastic detective at District 14 doing all kinds of larcenies and B&Es. Does that transition then to B2, where the majority of your cases are aggravated assaults, shootings, stabbings, robberies? Maybe not. I mean, you got to look at the individual, and I'll get off the subject and turn it over to the.
So basically, it's a concerted effort. I think we need to identify the talent that we have in the police department. Fortunately, I was a detective and also a sergeant detective, but there are existing sergeant detectives and lieutenant detectives that weren't a detective, and they do an outstanding job. I mean, should they have the opportunity because they weren't a detective to get in that position? Yes, I think they should. Should we mold them and train them? If they weren't a detective, send them to investigative classes, interview and interrogation classes? Yes, we should. So I think, to answer your question, I think it goes both ways. I think we have capable officers in our department that don't have that detective background that should be granted the opportunity to serve in that role.
And I feel like if you're in the sort of patrolman situation, you can become a sergeant, you can become a lieutenant, you can become a captain, you have those opportunities.
Yes.
If you're a detective, it seems like someone can kind of leapfrog in out of nowhere. I think from a morale standpoint, to obviously the deputy's point in terms of you're either a leader or you're not a leader, right? You could be a worker bee, but you're just not cut out to be a boss, right? And we could find those folks. I really would like to see us really support the detectives in that way, that if you're in the family, the detective's family, and that you're working up the ranks of detective. And again, Nora, you probably will have a front row seat now running the academy, and you'll probably identify right off the bat, oh, this person will make a great detective, or this person will make a great leader. You can probably almost identify them immediately, but I just it seems like the chase is on for the rating as opposed to really doing the work, and it has nothing to do with current sergeant, lieutenant, and captain detectives. I know they're doing great work, I respect them, but it almost seems like there's a little bit of game going on there. You want to get the rating, because with the rating comes enhanced stature and more pay and everything like that, but you really haven't done the work as a detective, and it just seems a little lopsided, and I'd like to see that
Well, we
addressed.
do currently post the positions, and we do put all the applicants, they're able to apply. We do have an interview process before the deputy or myself or a superintendent or a supervisor in a detective role. So there is some part of an interview process for those positions that if the people are interested, they are able to put in for that position.
Right. And I think from a rank and file perspective, I think people feel that that process is too political, and it's not really based on training and experience. It's, he was friends with so-and-so, or he used to drive the mayor, or he's held so-and-so's signs, or he had a few people call on his behalf, and I just think that it kind of warrants itself to that, as opposed to, hey, this person's a detective, came up through the detective ranks, working hard and identifying the leaders, as the deputy had mentioned, identify those true leaders, and then tap them, give them the sergeant detective rating, the lieutenant detective rating, the captain detective. I think it kind of weeds out the politics, if you will, and allows, and then we can encourage more folks to participate. It seems like it evens the scales a little bit.
Well, one of the things, Counselor, is that there's only one particular test to become a detective, right? Mm-hmm. So you may not necessarily take the detective test, but you may take the sergeant's test and you become a sergeant. So there's no other test to say become a sergeant detective, lieutenant detective, or captain detective. I know New York has a two-tier system where they have the investigative side and patrol force side, but there's only one exam that you can take to be a detective. There's no other exams after that point. So if you actually became a supervisor before you were able to take a detective's exam, then it would preclude any of those people from actually getting a rating. So we do it based on, as fair as possible as we can, based on your ability to lead, and your ability to manage. But unless there's a change in our dynamics where there's an exam for, say, a sergeant detective, lieutenant detective, captain detective, the only opportunity you have to become a detective is that one exam. So if you become a supervisor, sergeant, lieutenant, or captain prior to that, then there's no opportunity for you to even get a rated position.
Right. And I would support that system because it seems more fair. And, and maybe it's the New York model is the one, but I appreciate everyone's response to that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Council Flaherty. Council Braden, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for being here, being patient with us all on all these questions. One question I had was going back to, I see that there's a grant money specifically for testing of sort of cold cases, DNA testing. Can you give me some insight into where we are with the backlog of testings of rape test kits, or is that something that you folks deal with? Is that taken care of at the state lab? I think it's on page 244, the DNA Laboratory Initiative.
I believe you're referring to the city approved a grant that we got from the Department of Justice. It's a $2.5 million grant over a 3-year period.
Yeah.
It's for it's called the SAKI grant, which stands for Sexual Assault Kit Initiative.
Yeah.
And as part of that grant, it involves testing old cold cases in regards to sexual assault and DNA-related evidence. In addition to that, there's also training and services for victims of sexual assault cases. And currently we are in the process of, today is actually the day that we introduced the grant. And it's working. It's going to be it's working across the country, and I believe we're going to solve a lot of old unsolved cases, DNA-related cases, in regards to using this grant.
And maybe even exonerate some folks who were wrongly convicted if the DNA evidence is available as well.
Yes.
That's good. The other question I had was with regard to human trafficking. I know there's money for some attention to that as well. It was shocking to me to discover that right within like 100 yards of my house in Oak Square that there was human trafficking happening a few years ago, that right under our noses, and we didn't really. What's your strategy for, increasing public awareness and public education, and how prevalent is human trafficking across the city?
So our Boston Police Human Trafficking Unit is located out of the Family Justice Center in Brighton. Mm-hmm. their main objective is providing services to victims of human trafficking. The investigations can lead from an illicit massage parlor, online trafficking. Obviously, there's also street trafficking as well. And over the course of, I'll just give you a few statistical numbers. Just alone this year, the Human Trafficking Unit has provided services to 20 victims. It's doubled since last year at this rate. Last year, totally, it was 27 victims. So the Human Trafficking Unit works within a multi-working group where it involves not only just Boston police officers, but clinicians and service providers. So we are out there, they're out there doing their job, and they are doing an outstanding job, and we're identifying the victims that need services.
And are we able to identify especially youth and especially LGBT youth that are at risk, or is that something we do in partnership with other human services organizations?
Yes, we have. A lot of times we may get referrals from outside agencies, whether it be from DCF or outside law enforcement departments, but yes, we are.
Very good. And let's see, backlog. The other issue that comes up, and I know we have an elder liaison that works a lot with our elders, and we get calls about weird telephone calls that people get. It's obviously a scam, but yeah. An elder who is being, is there ways that we can, does the police department have ways to educate the populace, or are we working with Age Strong and other organisations in the city to try and raise awareness of predatory scams, especially targeted at our more vulnerable elders?
Yes, so that can be resolved either through the community agent or with community service officers. I get the scam calls, my parents get the scam calls. I just block them on my phone, but a lot of times, you know, we've gotten calls where maybe a grandson is in jail and people have gone, elderly victims have gone to the police, to a bank and withdrawn money out. So a lot of it, we can do more and be better in giving an educational portion of it. So if there's any elders that have questions, they can reach out to their community service office, and they'll be more than happy to have a public forum or come by and tell them the do's and don'ts of answering these scam calls.
Sounds good.
Over the last several years, we've provided analysis on fraud schemes and different types of activities, such as what you're describing, up to our Office of Media Relations, and our Public Information Officer has issued that information out publicly through the BPD News website, as well as through BPD social media. We actually created a presentation just recently that is going to be utilized at the request of the community. It's basically a brick briefing on fraud schemes that are currently taking advantage of elderly and others.
Yeah, and some of them are very credible. You know, they're very
much so.
The written ones you can sometimes spot, like if there's misspellings, but the ones that you get here on the telephone, it's a.
We also post on our department website, bpdnews.com, tips on different types of scams. So they're still on our department website as well.
Very good, thank you. How are we doing for time?
2 minutes.
2 minutes, wow. So the Shannon grant, I raised a question this morning about youth workers and programs for youth and diversion programs. It's sort of very distressing when we see young people getting into trouble. I know from my own family that it's very easy for our young men, especially, to get into trouble. So, in terms of the utilization of the Shannon grant, can you tell me a little more about how that works and how we're putting the money to work?
Councillor, the Shannon grant comes from, the Shannon grant comes from the Public Executive Office of Public Safety, the Commonwealth Public Office of Safety, sorry about that. And basically, every year we're awarded this grant. It's a calendar year grant. This year we were awarded $1.6 million. And basically, the amount of monies are awarded to nonprofits whose primary intention is to invest in the neighborhoods in which they reside and to look at-risk youth and provide programs and services to them. Some of the vendors that we currently have are the recipients of this funding is Boston Medical Center, Boston Centers for Youth and Families, Boston Public Health Commission, U Boston, Youth Connect, College Bound Dorchester, High Square Task Force, Sportsmen Tennis, Mothers for Justice and Equality. And the list goes on, but it's a very helpful program, and basically the funding goes to programs that they're initiating there. Sometimes it goes to salary because they can't afford the salaries of some of their workers because they're nonprofits. But we found it to be very helpful, and this grant has been around for quite some time, and they do great work.
Yeah. The reason I'm interested in Alston Brighton, we had Commonwealth Housing right in the middle, like 2020, in the start of the COVID epidemic. We had like a couple of shooting incidents involving our youth, and the Residents Association. Everybody was really concerned that, you know, in the middle of a pandemic, when everybody's locked down, that we're going to lose the handle on this thing. So we pursued trying to get funding for youth workers. There was no youth workers working with these young people or at Faneuil Gardens, and it's just been really difficult. So I know $1.5 million. It's not a
1.6.
Not a whole lot of money at the end of the day when you're talking about trying to do preventative work with young people. So we'll beat the bushes and try and find money wherever we can. But we should probably take a look at the Shannon grant and see if there's anything. Again, even just funding one youth worker could make a difference.
And we do a competitive bid process annually, so that I don't know exactly when that goes out, but I can surely find that out through our Office of Research and Development, who oversees this grant.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councilor Murphy, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. And thank you for sticking with us. I appreciate it. A few things, they've been mentioned, but I do think it's important to mention a few things again. You know, being an at-large counselor, I talk to residents from all over the city in every neighborhood, and time again, the residents talk about wanting more police presence. We talked earlier about beefing up the bike patrol, but also community policing and just seeing cops in the neighborhood. Those relationships and the presence in the neighborhood, I do believe, are so important. So I do think we have to really make an effort to hire more police officers, because it keeps coming back to that. We need to hire more, and 20, 30 is not enough at a time. We need to really hire like 100 whatever it's going to take to ease that. And that ties into the mental health. We know that this pandemic has wreaked havoc on the mental health of so many, and all departments across the city have been hit hard. We're halfway through our budget hearing, so we've sat with many other departments across the city, including the schools, which, you know, being a former teacher, I know that our teachers are struggling, and even, you know, our city hall workers, especially our first responders. So, you know, in normal times, your job is extremely stressful, and the forced overtime is only making it more stressful, and COVID is making it harder. So what more can we do to support the mental health and wellness of our first responders? It's kind of a rhetorical question, I know, but if it's adding more resources into the budget, and really, because I know we're also not expecting you've always done that, but the training that your force does to make sure when you're responding to mental health calls, because you're also responding to more of those calls through the pandemic also. So making sure that we're supporting you there. And on page 245 in the budget here, I see some great grants you have. I look at the Heal Boston. It seems like it's out of C11, or the Youth Engagement Grant, and would just love to know if you could speak a little to those, and what other opportunities do our youth have besides the cadet program, and if there's more you would like to see, I'd love to hear about that. So thank you.
Unfortunately, I don't know much about the Youth Engagement Grant, but I can get you information on that, because that would come primarily out of the Office of Research and Development, and we don't have anybody here for representation, but I'd gladly provide that information to you.
Mm-hmm. The other ones, like the Summer Youth Program, are there other programs out there also that anyone knows of that engage our youth? I don't know if Superintendent Baston, or if you know any. Or if you see the value and think we should
I mean,
invest more.
I could take the next hour to talk about them. I mean, there's that many.
Yeah.
Gail Boston is Officer D'Amberville from C11. He's been doing it for a while. A lot of that, you could be helpful. He pays out of his pocket. A lot of these officers that run their program, Lyanna Henderson runs something called Youth Leading the Way. A lot of them are doing their own time out of their own pocket. Each district has their, something that they kind of, that one officer in C6, Aisha, just spending time with them. A lot of times we do partner with Erica Butler in BCYF. She's a big component for the girls. We have to not forget about our young girls because that always comes up when violence comes up. And the best preventive tool is to build those relationships early. The GROW program that Officer Dickerson talked about, I mean, they came here to City Hall. These girls now are going into high school and some into college. And, but each district has one of each officer, but how you could help them is just like in 14, the funding is very small. We have PAL that helps pay, and a lot of the other funding comes from our own grants that we try to go out, the officers go out to get grants, but grants, you can't buy food, there's certain restrictions. So I think that would be very helpful because at the end of the day is just spending the time with these young people and building the relationship, and as you know, that takes time. When I say time, years. So that ongoing relationship, but the results are the programs that Laura Dickerson talked about, the successful ones that are happening all across the city. So any support from the councilors, you send grants to us, which is great because if we support our community partners that we work with, that will help them be strong, and then that kind of, we don't get the money, but they get the money and we work with them. But I think any grants coming our way, Shannon Grant is helpful, but it's very small. So if we can together collectively look at what programs that are in existence and how do you strengthen those ones. But there is a ton, and each district has their own unique sort of engagement, but the youth have, there's so much more that's needed.
No, thank you. And I appreciate that you mentioned that many spend out of their own pocket. I know as a teacher, many times teachers do the same and would never ask for reimbursement. It's just what you do. And a few times already on the job here, we've had police officers support if it's a family in need and saw that they were definitely, without question, just going and spending their own money to make sure kids had the right, sneakers or food or, so I appreciate that. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Murphy. Councilor Lujan, you have the floor. Oh,
I think Councilor Mejia.
Councilor Mejia, you have the floor.
Right.
Apologies. Councilor Mejia, you have the floor.
So thank you for your patience with us. So I just have some questions. This is in regards to the gang database, my favorite topic of all time. Entering my third year in this. Ready for these? Round one. I'm just checking. I'm just curious if there have been any discussions about eliminating or changing the gang database, and if so, who from the city and community has been involved in those discussions, and is eliminating the gang database an option that is being actively explored?
So the majority of our conversations are internal, admittedly. Last year, during the prior city council that was seated, we did engage in some dialogue under Councilor Campbell with, we were bouncing adjustments that we were making to the rule. So there has been engagement there. As far as whether or not we've discussed, I just want to make sure I'm contextualizing this appropriately, so please correct me if I give you the wrong answer here. As far as getting rid of the gang assessment database, sure, we've had those conversations of the impact that that could potentially have. So questions are often asked about the crimes that are solved because of the gang assessment database. But law enforcement is not built around solving crimes solely, it's prevention as well. The gang assessment database as a tool provides context to violence that's occurring in the city and the rationale for why it is occurring.
Let's stop there. Let's go back to my colleague, Councilor Latta's questions in terms of data and
Sure.
evidence that
Sure.
goes to validate that comment that you have just made.
Absolutely.
Where's that at?
surrounded by people that have personnel that utilize the database, so if at any point in time you want to provide some additional context, that's great.
No, but I'm talking specifically to the question that she asked in regards to the evidence, and that goes to show that having a gang database, any evidence was.
No, I was a lieutenant
Yeah.
detective for
Yeah.
6 years. I used a gang database for almost every shooting I had. And I had B2 had the highest clearance rate of aggravated assaults in the city. And the gang database was instrumental in defining why an incident was happening, who was connected to who was an accomplice. It was critical. So it does assist in solving cases, specifically aggravated assaults and more specifically shootings. Because the majority of your shootings are obviously people that are involved in firearms, and the possibility or the potential of them being identified early on and put in the gang database is good.
Right, so I guess what I'm trying to get at is that Councilor Lada's question was, can you provide evidence to support the claim that the gang database reduces gun violence in Boston?
Well, if you're locking up people that are involved in gun
And the
gun
more
violence, then
specific
obviously
and
you're
detailed that you
decreasing
can be,
crime.
the better, right? So when you answered it, Director, you couldn't produce or point to data to back up the claim.
In my defense, I needed a few minutes to think through the question that was being asked.
Okay, well then that's a different, okay, so I'm glad that we landed there. I'm good.
So the more we discuss this, the more can surface.
Okay. Thank you.
From 2016 to 2021, I was a detective and a supervisor in the Boston Police Homicide Unit. And I utilized the gang database on individuals that self-admitted being its gang members to solve 2 different homicides. One specifically, an individual was shot and killed in 2017 walking through Roberts Playground onto Ashburn Street just because he was wearing a Chicago Bulls baseball cap. If it wasn't for that database, we wouldn't have been able to solve that homicide and make 2 arrests.
Okay, so let me go to a homicide question then, since this is where you took me. The BPD has a dashboard on homicide clearances, right? But there is no data around race, age, gender, neighborhood, or where the crime happened, right, I believe. Do you all have that data?
Data on where a homicide occurs.
It says the BPD has a dashboard on homicide clearances, right?
Yes.
Okay. But there is no data. Is there data around race, gender, neighborhood, and where the crime happened?
Yes, there is.
There is.
I'm not aware of what the dashboard looked like, but there is.
In 2021, how many homicides involving black victims were cleared compared to homicides involving white victims?
I'd have to research that I could find. I just know I can tell you how many were cleared, but it's not broken down that I have by race or gender.
Do you
But
see?
we can access that.
Okay, so that's what I'm looking for.
Yes.
That would be extremely helpful.
Okay.
So how much time do I have, Chair?
Another 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. And for the audience who is tuning in, this is an educational moment for all of us here. So there's this thing called the Critical Infrastructure Monitoring System.
SIMS, yes, correct.
That's right. Is a regional surveillance camera network operating in Boston and 7 surrounding communities. And a recent communication from the Office of Emergency Management indicated that cameras that make up the SIMS have microphones on them. And I'm just curious, have these microphones been activated? And if so, when and for what purposes?
So, Counselor, you're looking at me, so I'll do my best to answer the question. We're not involved with the management of that comes under telecommunications, but I am not aware of the activation of any microphones on cameras, period. Lisa, can you answer?
We do not have that feature activated on the cameras. I know that for a fact.
So that's a no.
Yes or no? Thank you. Can you please provide us with a list of all the people who have access to camera feeds in Boston, including their department name, their rank, and if available, information related to the specific incidences which they access Boston camera feeds. Do you have that information?
That should be an audit feature, and for the individuals that are managing the camera access, the administrators, that information should be accessible.
And so if we shall ask for it, we shall get it?
I believe so, Counselor. I don't manage those systems, but from an auditing standpoint, I just don't know how granular the auditing capability is. They're not mine.
Okay.
I'm trying to be helpful by,
No, it's all good.
yeah.
We got you.
The video evidence unit manages and
Yeah.
administrates.
Has there been any change in the number of officers or police personnel on federal task force between this year and last year? And how many officers are on federal task forces?
I don't believe there has been any change. I don't have the exact numbers of how many officers are on federal task forces, but I can get that for you. I just don't have it at this time.
That would be helpful. And can you just talk to me a little bit about, I'm going to go back to the 911 operators really quick. I understand that we need to work on diversifying our supervisory role. I believe there's only one black person and how many white males? The rest are white males. So actually, does anyone know about the diversity in the 911 operating?
The actual call takers and
Yeah.
I don't have the actual stats, but the actual call takers and the dispatchers is a very diverse group of
The
individuals.
supervisors?
Supervisors are police officers, and I don't know the diversity.
I could tell you what it is. You have 1 black and 13 white males. That is your supervisory role for the 911 operators. So there's room for growth and improvement. In terms of benchmarks, this would be a good recording for us to have. And then when you come back next year, we can increase that. That would be a really great goal for us to work towards. Because I feel like, you know, we keep having the conversation around increasing diversity, but it seems like the urgency around it is not meeting the moment of this time. I'm gonna move on to I'm gonna go back to my favorite subject, BRIC again. Can you just talk to us a little bit about the community engagement efforts? I know you said that Councilor Campbell had, you know, engaged in some community conversations and some work around that space. What would you say is the main reason why we're still having the conversation around getting rid of the gang database? Like, what's the resistance around it?
Frankly, because it shouldn't be removed.
And can you just talk to us a little bit about the racial profiling and the impact the impact, right?
There is no racial profiling. Zero.
Okay. All right. But we just, in the earlier hearing that we had, we talked about the number of the stop and frisk and the neighborhoods of Dorchester, Roxbury, Mattapan having the highest rate. So how are you going to tell me that there is no racial profiling?
But there's no such thing as stop and frisk in Boston. If someone's frisked,
Well, you know, stopping the, okay.
persons are stopped based on reasonable suspicion.
Yeah, we talked about reasonable suspicion, and how are we defining reasonable suspicion?
That a crime is, has, or is likely to occur. That's the definition of reasonable suspicion. You're educated on that in the academy. You execute that when you're out as a police officer. That's clear. That's established, and there's case law on that. If you're referring to a Terry stop, that's the case law that governs stops as per reasonable suspicion. If you're talking about stop and frisk, that does not exist. A person is frisked under a different sort of circumstance.
I appreciate the education, and I'm sorry that I said frisk, but I will say this, that I got a call from a parent at 12:30 at night that her son was being harassed and stopped for no reason. And the impact that had on him and the family is traumatizing. So this is where there's a disconnect, right? Because
Okay, ma'am, you're dealing with a conversation we had with someone. We're dealing with facts. And
But you can't say that a constituent calling me at 12:30 at night with a
we don't have any-
situation.
we don't know about that. What we're dealing with is what factually happens out in the street, based on reasonable suspicion and other factors, 911 calls and other things. I mean, you got to separate the two. You're asking us if we're doing stop and frisk. I'm telling you we're not.
And that's fine.
And you asked about reasonable suspicion, and I defined it for you.
Excuse me a moment. The counselors will ask questions, and the panelists and the department will answer. You will allow the counselors to finish their questions, and we will do that on both ends respectfully. But please do not cut off the counselor, and please allow her to finish. And if there is a correction to be made, we ask that we continue this conversation with respect. I appreciate you. Council Mejia, you have 2 minutes.
No, I just want to say, I apologize that I used the wrong terminology in terms of what I was trying to articulate. I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that there is a culture where a lot of young people and people of color feel like they're oftentimes being targeted. And because of that culture, it is very difficult for us to build the type of relationships that we're all making an effort to do. And if I don't call it out or name it and bring it into this chamber, then I'm not uplifting the voices of the people who I represent. So we can go back and forth with the terminology and what's appropriate and how it looks, but at the end of the day, is how people feel and how they get treated. That oftentimes is what I'm here to respond to. So it may have not been a factual thing. The parent may have exaggerated her experience, but the trauma that her child shared is something that I need to take serious. And so these situations are happening, and they may not be happening at an alarming rate enough for you all to even consider it to be a problem. But even one case and one call at 12:30 at night is enough for me to bring it into this chamber and present it to you all as something that we need to contend with. That's all.
I totally agree and understand where you're coming from, because there are times where kids come home and tell their parents that they've been stopped by the police, and they have no idea that there was a 911 call on them. So I think if there's an issue and the parent feels very concerned and upset about it, they should visit their district station and ask to speak to a supervisor. Maybe there was a 911 call given out. Maybe the officer did stop the person inappropriately, but I think that we should make that extra effort, that step forward to find out exactly what happened.
Thank you, Detective.
And I'd like to extend, we can have a follow-up with that particular incident that you're referring to, is get more information, and so we can look into it further for you, okay?
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Councilor Lujan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this goes back to a question that I stated earlier that was asked. I just want to make sure that I put in this request formally through the chair for a list of the nonprofits that last 3, 4 years, 5 years that have received grants from BPD by order of amount that they received the grants. I think that would be information that's really helpful. Is that information that we can get from you? And not just based on the Shannon grant, based on all grants.
The list of nonprofits, I've lost you.
The list of nonprofits that receive grant funding from BPD. And if I could request, the way that we receive information is bad. It's not easy to read. It is not easy to understand at times. One page says something, and then I ask, and then it's something else. It'd be great if we could receive this information in a way that's easy to read, in Excel format. Thank you. In the court's opinion on the BRIC database, I'm not going to belabor the point because it's been discussed, but the court said the BRIC database does not contain reasonable, substantial, and probative evidence of gang membership or association, and the government provided no other evidence to substantiate the inference and conclusions drawn from the police reports via the BRIC point system. And I think that's what we're discussing today, a flawed system, even, that is let's even accept without discussion that there's no racial profiling involved. We know that it disproportionately includes folks of color in that database. And so I think the discussion is, does BRIC cause more harm than good? And that's why the data requests are important, to make that assessment of whether it's causing more harm than good. To me, it's causing harm, and period. But if you're making this argument, that is why the data is important. Wanted to move on to another question, if you'll bear with me. A lot of my other questions were asked, the questions about rape kit processing. I think we have to do a much better job there. Around information sharing with other states, is there a process involved with, like, if there's an investigation happening, let's say in Rhode Island or, Connecticut, New York, what is the process for information sharing?
Specific to the BRIC, information sharing is central to our mission and our existence. We review each request that comes in to determine whether or not it's being made by a law enforcement entity, or if not, what the circumstances are there. We try to verify who that person is to make sure that they are legitimate. Second, it has to meet a law enforcement standard. It's got to be for an official law enforcement purpose. We typically ask what that purpose is. More often than not, it's related to an investigation. And we try to take note of some type of a reference number so that we can tie that back to one. One thing that I would say is very, very important to note is the role of the Trust Act, the City of Boston Trust Act, in our information sharing. We have always operated in compliance with the Trust Act. Keep in mind the Trust Act changed. We adjusted with the Trust Act when it did change.
Okay, thank you. So my question is really thinking about the times we're in and how we'll share information with other states. So does BPD, or are you thinking about a plan, if police from Texas, for example, ask for information about someone under investigation for getting an abortion here in Massachusetts? Will you cooperate with that? What are the standards to determine whether you cooperate? And what can we do as a city to make sure that we're not cooperating?
That's a great question, Counselor. That's a great question. I think that's a policy matter that we need to discuss internally. We've never received a request like that. I can't envision us receiving something like that, but it's not. But exactly, it's not out of the question.
Right now, is there a formal process, like that outlines how you share information with other states, or is it just this,
It's more of a standard that is reflective of of our privacy policy. We call it our privacy policy, but that privacy policy really is the heart and soul of the policy that exists within the BRIC. There's nothing written into that policy specific to what you're describing here, but we've made adjustments based upon new laws that have come about.
Like the surveillance?
Surveillance is coming into there. We're actively, just so you know, we are actively updating that policy with some of the new things that have come our way over the past year. Some of those policies time-consuming to put together. What I will say is that there is supervisory review, and there's discretion to deny a request if it seems like it's unethical or if it shouldn't happen.
I'm a lawyer, and sometimes discretion scares me.
I understand.
Because discretion can lead to making decisions that are against our values as a city.
Understood.
As a state.
Understood.
Are there examples where actually, I don't really care about examples. You said it's time consuming. I'd love for the city council to work with BPD on creating what those policies may look like. I was going to ask for examples of when these have been hard decisions in the past. We can talk about that some other time because I'm limited. But we know that both for abortion care and gender affirming care, we're going to see a lot of issues. Like are in a state that does comparatively to other states a pretty good job, and we may be receiving folks from other states that are criminalizing that health care. And so just want to make sure that we are thinking ahead and that on how we not comply.
From a values standpoint, I would say that I think my values are reflective of that of the city, and if it came across my desk, I would not allow it.
Your values, I want them to be BPD values. That's where discretion is a problem.
I understand.
So, especially, if we have one state defining it as a this could go many ways, right? And so what is the varying standard, right? Do we typically help if it's a homicide, and what will the policy be? A second question is related to ShotSpotter. I think there was a recent Inspector General investigation from, I think, Chicago. It said that ShotSpotter technology sometimes responds to things that aren't shots being fired. And I would just ask if, do we find that, what happens here when ShotSpotter is, sets off, it identifies something that is actually not a gunshot, right?
So ShotSpotter, it does send out alerts, and it can send out alerts for various things, specifically gunshots. But they also have things that are classified as backfiring, firecrackers, things of that nature. It does happen occasionally where there is a ShotSpotter alert and it ended up being something other than gunshot fire. But when officers arrive on scene, what they do is they usually tell us, well, somebody said, hey, a car backfired or a bottle broke or something along those lines. We then, the districts are directed to call ShotSpotter and let them know that that was a misclassification of an alert, and they adjust their system. Or they, if it becomes an issue in a certain area, like maybe 1 or 2 sensors are out, they'll come and service the sensors so that they'll accurately alert us when there's actual gunfire.
Okay, great. I don't have that much time. I could also get data on the past 2 years showing how many alerts were confirmed to be related to gunfire, as well as any information about the results of ShotSpotter alerts.
Okay.
Investigations that led to arrest, prosecutions, or FIOs.
So with the arrests and FIOs, that would be something that we would have to probably go through our system for. But as far as data that is housed at ShotSpotter, we would have to make a request through that, and they usually will not do it unless it's a Freedom of Information Act. So okay. we would have to get a Freedom of Information Act. I can send it over to ShotSpotter, and they usually comply within a reasonable period of time.
Okay, great. You send over the FOIA.
Yeah, it'll go through our legal department. Okay. And I'm the director of ShotSpotter for the department. Great. So then I'll contact their counterpart at ShotSpotter, let them know that a FOIA request has been made. I'll send a FOIA request over there. There's certain proprietary things that they're not going to give us, but they'll give us everything else that they can.
Thank you. And then can we also have a map of where all the ShotSpotters are located in the city?
We don't have that information.
Could we get it? Is it possible?
No, they won't give it to us. So what it is they don't want people to identify where the sensors are because they can be in an area that are easily accessible and they can be damaged or destroyed.
Okay. Okay, and then can I ask one final question? BPD makes incident reports data public on the city's open data portal. It's not clear if what those incident reports are compared to police reports. So can you just give some clarification on what the incident reports are compared to an arrest report?
So the incident reports are police reports.
Mm-hmm. Is that different from an arrest report?
The arrest report is documented within an incident report. But when an individual goes through a booking process, there's certain details that are collected there that are in a separate system.
So you can have an incident report without an arrest report? But if you have an arrest report, it's within an incident report?
Yes.
Okay. And so, but there wouldn't be an incident report filed, there wouldn't be a separate incident report for an incident and then arrest report for an incident. It would be contained in one document?
That's correct.
Okay.
It's the same I number.
Okay, thank you. And I wanted to say this when President Flynn was here, to the question also of diversity among 911, just talking about operators here. I know that a request in Chinatown was made, and I'm going to elevate this as well. And I don't even know if this was within your jurisdiction, but language diversity, because when people are calling 911, they deserve to be able to talk to someone who can understand their language. Mm-hmm. And that has been a barrier for a lot of communities. So thank you for your time. I hope that we'll get the answers to those formal requests that we submitted to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. I'm going to invite you guys down if you want to sit on this table to testify, for those of you who signed up. And if you don't want to sit on that side, those chairs are more comfortable. I tell everyone that because I sat out there once for a few hours and I couldn't bear it. So if you can come down, I just have a round of questions and then it's your turn, but you sit there and I'll get the order of which you signed up for public testimony. So I want to talk a little bit about addiction and in terms of outreach unit interactions. What are your outcomes, and do you have that data here? And if you don't, if you can submit it.
Are you talking about the street outreach unit?
Yes.
I have some data. What are you looking for specifically?
So how many referrals do officers make?
I don't have that data.
How many referrals individuals receive care, actually care? Do you know?
The street outreach unit has that data. I don't have it on hand.
Okay. As a chair, I'm asking that to be formally submitted. What do you think limit individuals from receiving care? When you do have a referral, is anyone here that can answer that if referrals are made, what limits them from getting care? Like, what are your obstacles?
My conversations with the street outreach unit, they make referrals every day, is the obstacle to them receiving care is their decision not to receive the care. That's the feedback that I've been getting from the street outreach unit, which is out there every day, day in, night, working with Boston Public Health and other city agencies. They are continuously offering the care. So the feedback that I'm receiving is it's a matter of them deciding to accept that or not accept it.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of back to mental health for officers, I'm also very interested in that. I think that anyone who is overworked, sleep deprived, and works in trauma-inducing conditions deserve self-care, whatever that means, whether it's mental health or some sort of therapy. Council Flaherty mentioned chiropractic services. What are the obstacles for officers currently to receiving mental health care?
As far as I know, and I'm not as well read into it as other people, there's no obstacles. Everything that an officer does or requests with the peer support is confidential, and that information is not released to anybody in the department. It's between the officer and the peer support counselors. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that is.
Sure. The service exists. When they ask, it's confidential, so you don't really.
We can't track it. It's between the peer support group and the officer, him or herself.
Say an officer goes out off duty, what do you call it, on leave for mental health services due to trauma or whatever. Do you think that there are stigmas in the department where it makes it difficult for people to access mental health services or supports?
I mean, all I can offer you is my opinion.
Yeah?
I don't think so, no.
Okay.
I'd like to say that I don't think so either, because it's now that officers are attempting to stay well. They're trying to preserve their health and wellness. So if I go to someone and I need help, I'm going to get help. There's no fear of being stigmatized for asking for help on this particular job at this point in time.
Okay. All right. I mean, I think our experiences are all different, right? It's not a matter of fact and opinions, but a matter of experience and subjective experiences. I have officers in my family, and I know many officer friends who are in the force, and some who sought help and have been brutally stigmatized and isolated or ostracized. So I think it's a huge issue, especially when it's like highly male industry, to be able to seek help and not feel like you're crazy or not be called crazy. And I've talked to friends who deal with this on a daily basis. And never mind if you are, a black male seeking that help, because that's even further stigmatized, because in the black community, it's even, more harm in terms of us seeking help. And I think, I don't know the number, but aren't officers at the top of the list for suicide rates? Along with dentists, social workers, and prison officers?
It's up there.
It's up there, right?
Yes.
So my conversations coming from, again, from family members who are officers and friends who are officers, and understanding that you have to face trauma day in and day out. Sometimes when I'm talking to officers or when we've interacted with officers in the community, it's a tough thing to have a society that you go out to risk your life to protect a group. And then there are systemic issues that we want to argue in terms of police reform. And then there's further harm done because the relationship and that level of trust or connection is not properly being built at a very early stage, as I heard Superintendent Baston mention earlier. And then you are constantly either feared or hated. This is the reality between community and officers. In order for us to, I think, create more, reform, is to build our relationships and have these conversations. And that's why I ask you these questions on record, because they are also a part of services to be implemented so that you can do your job as well.
Can I just add that at the academy, the officers' wellness is, we have over 60 hours of officers' health and wellness. So everything you're saying is like what we would talk to the recruit officers. We take it very serious. It's implemented out through the entire curriculum. And when they get into the BPD and put on their blues, but that has been a crucial part, just like you said. Everything that you mentioned is exactly what we talk about. We bring in different speakers, and we, at the academy level, that is the onset to know what they're gonna be prepared, when they become police officers and the added stress and trauma. So at the academy level, they get a lot of hours just to bring that awareness.
Oh, great. I'm happy to hear that.
And when I spoke earlier, I was speaking from my experience.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. Well, I was speaking earlier from my experience. I've actually referred multiple officers to get some type of peer support, and that was brought to me by the attention of other officers they were working with, and all those officers have received the help that they've needed.
Thank you. So what is the city, us? What are we doing to collaborate with you to create a summer plan? The summer's coming. Things are getting worse. Have we collaborated with you? Have we partnered with you? Or what have we done, or what can we do to collaborate and work on a plan for the summer?
So I can, are you saying about violence? Is that what your
Yes.
question? Oh, so we've had a number, we've had a number of meetings with the mayor's office and different community partners. I think at least 4 or 5 meetings. So maybe having the city council be part of those meetings, because we have said numerous times about what is the summer plan. We also did those months ago, so we're not waiting to the summer. So they're ongoing. Rufus Falk heads them, right? Correct, Jen? So that's something I think you guys should get part of, so you're aware of the summer plan and be part of the conversation.
Okay, great. I mean, I think I like to go on record in asking the administration for that information.
Absolutely.
So that we are previewed. I guess I'm going to yield there so that I've probably reached my time for public testimony. Are you comfortable there? I think it's kind of odd when you guys are standing back there, right, and no one is looking at you and you're just speaking to people's backs, right? This is better? You good there? Okay. So first I have Nasika. Okay. Nasika, state your name, and you don't have to state residence, but affiliation, and you have 2 minutes to testify.
No problem. Hi, my name is Nasika Verdu. I am a part of YJP, which is Youth Justice and Power Union. And today I am here to testify because I'm actually didn't plan on testifying, but I heard a few things that made me feel like I should talk. It was said today that officers work 16 hours a day for 5 days a week, and that impacts them mentally and physically and their family. And the solution that was brought up, or solution that was spoken of, was by increasing the number of officers from 200 to 300 every year until we catch up. And I personally feel like, okay, that's one solution, but another solution that I feel like is feasible and possible is divesting from the police officers. I feel like whenever the conversation of divesting comes into the circle, people don't tend to listen and think that when we say divest, we mean take away funds, and that's it, leave them there like a bunch of people with no money and nothing to do with it. when we say divest, we also mean taking away the responsibilities that certain police officers hold and giving it to the community, taking away that extra burden, taking away that extra responsibility that they would be expected to do. Personally, for me, I've seen police officers respond very horribly in mental health situations, seen them respond very horribly to people who are homeless, seen them respond very horribly to people that are on drugs, that are going through withdrawal. And I feel like that is not their place. They should not have that seat to be talking on that, because personally, I feel like they're not educated enough to be in that space. I also feel like if mental health is a top priority that they are speaking of, and I'm glad that they brought that into the conversation, what about the mental health of the people in our community? The people that feel terrorized when police officers are around, the people that feel terrorized when they see red and blue lights. And that's not to say that they're criminals, that's to say that they know that people are out there looking for them. Now to talk on the position of BRIC, personally, I feel like BRIC is not a tool, it's not an instrument. Instead, I feel like it's a racist system that is implemented in communities of lower income, POC communities, and that they're nitpicking on people and finding little issues that's wrong with what they're doing to give them a reason to find a way into jail. Currently, Black people make up 13% of our population, but 40% of those who are incarcerated. I would love to see the number of people who are on BRIC that are Black, the numbers who are Latinx, the numbers who are Asian, Muslims, and then I'd like to see the numbers who are white. I feel like finding the white numbers would be a lot harder, like a needle in a haystack during nighttime, but that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Nasika, thank you very much for your testimony. You remind me a lot of Councilor Lara. She will love you when she watches this video. And let us know when you're running for office. Next we have Wahaj.
Hello?
Yes. Hello.
Hello.
State your name and affiliation, and you have 2 minutes to testify.
Hello, my name is Wahaj Farah. I'm a resident of Mission Hill and a member of YJPU. And I'm going to be talking to you about cutting the police budget and divesting $120 million from the $400 million police budget and freezing all hiring from the Boston Police. In 2020, numerous city councilors worked to cut 10% of the police budget. As you can see in front of you from the article from the Boston Herald, in 2020, councilors Ricardo Arroyo, Kenzie Bach, Liz Breeden, Andrea Campbell, Lydia Edwards, Julia Mejia, and Michelle Wu co-signed a letter to Marty Walsh under the lead of Kim Janey to cut the police budget by 10%, which is about $41 million, which would have brought the budget down to $373 million. At the height of the BLM movement, our city councilors were using the opportunity to promote their agenda of being good-hearted politicians. But at the same time, as we see a decrease in sustainability within their promises. Out of the 10% promises in 2020, while some city councilors try to fight for divesting from the police budget, others didn't put that much effort into it. Only about 2.42% of the budget was cut. For some context, that's about $10 million. $10 million. What is $10 million going to do for the city? We need to make a sustainable solution to the budget cut where the same momentum councilors had during the BLM protest be put into today's fight for the budget cut. Why are you guys treating BLM like a fad? Why are you guys not listening to the outcry of the residents? There's no excuse anymore to point fingers at the mayor. Now that you have the power to divest from the budget, the responsibility is on you. Residents of this city don't want empty promises. We want action to divest from the police budget and reallocate it to other departments in the city. Let's build a better Boston for Bostonians. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Wahaj, for your testimony and for being so professional and well prepared. Next we have, is it Favor?
Hello? Okay, it's Favor.
Favor, thank you. Your name, affiliation, and you have 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Hello, my name is Favor Ejams, and I'm here with YJPU. I'd like to start off by saying that I'm very grateful for this opportunity. My only wish is that you guys don't take our words with a grain of salt, but actually listen and understand what we're all trying to say here today. While I do greatly appreciate the changes of the budget, I like to say that cutting off $4 million from the police budget doesn't overwhelm me with joy. Instead, I can't help but think that this is merely just the bare minimum. Is cutting off $4 million going to put an end to the corrupt system, stop racial profiling, or stop the senseless deaths due to police brutality? Will it make the Black and brown communities of Boston feel more at ease when being approached by law enforcement? The answer is no. I find it a little questionable how there are people here who boldly ask about the mental health of police officers, but don't seem to advocate for the mental health of people who have gone through trauma because of the police. The problem isn't that we're lacking in the number of police. We do not need Boston to become even more police than it already is. I don't understand why people think that increasing the number of police will decrease the number of crime. We cannot fight fire with fire. What would actually decrease the number of crime is investing in other social programs like public health, education, and youth jobs. When people are now getting the opportunities that they deserve, they're less likely to get into crime. We need to cut the police budget to $280 million, decrease the number of police, and freeze the hiring of new police and cadets. Stop upholding white supremacy by giving the slave patrol what they want. Instead, listen to the voices of the residents and youth of Boston. Defund Boston cops and invest in the youth of Boston. Thank you.
Thank you, Favor. Next, we have Nazra or Ayan. Are you? Oh, they're both up there. And Reem? Are you Reem? Okay. Do you want to go first, since you're there? Okay. Nazra?
It's Nasra.
Nasra.
Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum.
Islam.
You have 2 minutes.
Okay. Hello, my name is Nasra Aden, and I live in District 7, and I'm part of YJPU. YJPU is demanding that the City of Boston spends more money on affordable housing. We want to spend more money on affordable housing so rent becomes easier to pay for people who are living in lower income households. Making affordable housing will allow people to have a stable household and have a safer place to stay. In order to know how much we want to invest in affordable housing, we need to know how much the city is spending on the police budget. So I'll be asking you some of these questions to know how much is going towards the police budget so we can invest that money into affordable housing. What is the mayor doing with the $79 million that is for the reserve for collective bargaining since 2020 contract has ended? What are they using it for and where is it going? And if it's going towards the police academy and police force, then we need to cut that money down. Then it can actually go into something useful like affordable housing and youth jobs. A group called CFJJ has released a report saying that they believe the pension cost is about $125 million for the police budget in 2021. Is it true that the administration is spending this amount of money towards the police budget? The report also brings up how we believe that about $43 million is going towards health insurance costs. And in total, we believe that the estimated hidden cost is around $168 million. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nasra. Reem?
Is it? Oh, all right. I didn't know it was going to be that loud. Assalamu alaikum. I'm not going to be here for long. I just have one thing to say. So my name is Reem, and I'm a resident of Mission Hill. I'm not affiliated, but I'm just here to be here. And I'm here to just respond to the racial profiling statement. Since BRIC is as beneficial as you say, how come there was a report conducted by Columbia, Rutgers, and the University of Mass that analyzed over 200,000 plus encounters between BPD and civilians, and it found racial disparities in BPD's stop and frisk that cannot be explained by crime or other non-race factors. And blacks during that period were the subject of 63.3% of police-civilian encounters, although less than a quarter of the city's population is black. So how is it that adding more police will guarantee that there's going to be more good than damage? And how is it that your police are on the streets that they're supposed to be protecting, but causing more harm? Thank you.
Thank you. Ayan? Hey. State your name, affiliation, and you have 2 minutes.
Hello, my name is Ayan Mohammed from District 7, and I'm affiliated with YJPU. Hello, my name is Ayan Mohammed, as I just stated, and I live in the Roxbury neighborhood of District 7, and I'm here to demand that Mayor Wu and the city councilors divest $120 million from the $400 million Boston police budget, including a real cap on overtime spending, invest the $120 million to community mental health response, youth jobs, affordable housing, and an office for construction details, and to freeze all hiring for the new police, no new cops, and no new cadets. The current police budget is enormous, period. At $400 million per year, BPD is only second to BPS in overall funding, dwarfing all other departments. That's almost 3 times the size of the Cabinet of Health and Human Services and 4 times the size of the Public Health Commissions. That's worrying at the best of times, but during a global pandemic, it's outrageous. Is any of this making communities any safer? Over-policing of Black and brown people in Boston has been going on for decades. Police have been terrorizing them while programs to address the core violences, the core causes of violences have been ignored and consistently neglected. Even when officers commit apparent violations, they refuse to take responsibility. Instead of pouring money into a system plagued with prejudice and impunity, it's time to rethink our priorities. Boston needs to prioritize its residents, and not through performative means such as painting Black Lives Matters on the street. We want real and effective change. Boston's police department is frankly a joke. The police commissioner was fired over domestic violence allegations. Many police officers have been charged with overtime fraud. The former head of the powerful patrolmen's union was arrested and pled guilty for the molestation of children. Keep in mind that the department had known 20 years prior that Patrick Rose had sexually abused a child in 1995, but allowed him to remain on the force and interact with children in Dorchester despite that. 33 counts of sexual abuse against children aged 7 to 16 years old. Is that protecting the community? I don't think so. Policing is a corrupted system, and corruption cannot fix our communities. We need our city to understand this. I mean, comparing police to teachers, that's literally absurd, and you know it. All I've heard today is the panelists deny that the police is racist and provide no real answers to questions given to them. All answers were generic or along the lines of, I don't have the specific numbers, or I don't know at all. One of you even went as far as saying that police don't racially profile. I mean, come on. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Go D7. District 7, you guys are a powerhouse, and I appreciate you. Come anytime. We look forward to seeing each other again in these testimonies. After hearing the final person signed on, I'll allow the panelists to respond if they would like to. Typically, the format is we don't go back and forth between the public. Thank you. You can remain there if you like. George, you're signed on as well. Are you all set?
No, should I go here or here?
Oh, right here is fine. George Lee, please state your name and affiliation for the record, and you also have a couple minutes.
Hello. Hi, my name is George Lee. I'm also here supporting the young people at Youth Justice and Power Union. I also believe one of our members, staff members, Khalil, is in the Zoom waiting to testify virtually. Also calling on the City Council and the Mayor to divest $120 million from the Police Department and put that in community needs, affordable housing, youth jobs, community-based crisis response for mental health, creating an office for civilian details instead of police details, and really emphasizing that both you as Chair of Ways and Means and the City Council in general has the power this year. A lot of times we've come in the past saying, hey, can you move the money? And City Councilors would say, we can't do it. But now that question 1 has passed, y'all have that power, and that it's really key that y'all are able to identify, all right, we want to amend the budget by cutting these specific police items by this much, and then we're going to move that money into these items that the community wants. So hoping that you can report back a revised budget from your committee, or that the City Council can work together in your working sessions to identify that. And to emphasize, as someone else mentioned, that it's not just about decreasing money from the police, but also about putting that money into what actually keeps the community safe. For example, Councilor Louisiana, I know you expressed concern, well, if we freeze hiring, what impact will that make? Can we keep our community safe still? What will the police do in response if we freeze hiring? But if we invest that money, I was just looking at a question there, maybe I'm misunderstanding. But if we invest that money, for example, in community-led crisis response, then it's not just about taking money from the police, but it's about investing right in that alternative. And that's what y'all have the power to do as a City Council, is to say, this is the community program that would actually keep us safer rather than the police. And so hoping that y'all can be open to really freezing hiring, decreasing the number of police, and investing in what we need instead. Similarly, instead of a gang database, I've worked with young people who've been labeled as gang members, who are sleeping on couches in each other's homes, who can't have jobs? What if we invested in housing and jobs that would actually support young people and young adults instead of labeling with point systems and getting them arrested and deported? And then so in terms of y'all identifying where you can actually cut specific items from the police budget, really hoping y'all really look into the numbers. How many officers and cadets are they hiring next year? How much are they going to cost? What if you froze hiring, didn't have any new police academy classes? How much money would you save next year and in the future? How does overtime really get decided? A lot of times the police say we can't stop it. We have to spend overtime. It's in the contract, but it feels like there's a lot of overtime hours that are discretionary. And so really figuring out who decides how many hours and what is not required by the contract so you can cut that overtime budget. Cutting the brick budget is another way you could put money into things that actually keep the community safe. There's other things like contracts for clinicians that could be moved into another department. And finally, the $79 million fund, which it's worrisome. What's the plan? Is the plan to give police retroactive raises, 1%, 2%? You know, it looks like the police budget has been decreasing, but all that's going to just get wiped away if we use $79 million to back pay millions and millions. So can you actually cut that amount and say, all right, sure, we'll keep a collective bargaining reserve for teachers and firefighters, but let's not use that money for the police, and we'll use some of that $79 million for the other things that we're asking for. So again, hoping that y'all can really identify some of those concrete line items and amendments to invest in what the community is asking for.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimonies. I think just clarification, and I'm sure you guys know this already, in terms of the amendment. So with the amendment to the charter, we do have now the authority to amend the operating budget. Of course, that includes BPD, as well as BPS, and that's sort of relying on some clauses in the acts of 1939 and others that we have to look in terms of like how or what autonomy we actually have on that. In terms of BPD, yes, we do have that autonomy. And I think that it's very important for us to clarify that what happens is, so by June 8th, we have to take action, and whether it's reject the mayor's budget proposal or accept it or amend it. And with that, we need 7 votes. And once we send it over, whatever action we take, reject, accept, or amend, that requires 7 votes. The mayor can then veto it, and if she sends it back to us, we then need 9 votes in order to override her veto. And so that is actually the power. So to count, we really need 9 votes from the council. So it's important to know that, because counting 2/3 of the council support is harder than 7 votes. And I would encourage you to lobby your councilors as well, the rest of the councilors that are not here, but all of us on these issues. And hopefully we all get to a place that we're making our city better and a safer place. Thank you for coming, and you're welcome to remain for the last round of this session. Thank you. We do have Paige Sparks, Khalil Howie, and Luann O'Connor virtual waiting. So Paige first.
Hi folks, are you able to hear me?
We can. You have 2 minutes. Ms. Page, state your name for the record and affiliation.
Sure. My name is Paige Sparks. I'm a resident of Jamaica Plain. In listening to the first session, the theme that has really stuck out to me is the lack of usable data coming out of BPD, and the data that isn't provided to the public, including the council. Without that data, there's really no way for anyone to know what's actually effective in keeping our community safe here in Boston, which is a goal I think we can all agree on. I personally have asked multiple times if BPD does any meaningful analyses beyond simple crime rate reporting, such as crime rates across time, perhaps as a function of spending or number of officers, or any other number of metrics, and have been told that this isn't available. Without this type of analysis, we're looking at raw numbers across time with no context about what might be driving these changes. Additionally, in the last session, one of our counselors asked if there were times when reports are not taken, and I can speak again from experience that there are in fact times when a citizen is looking to report a crime, not for it to be resolved, but to simply provide the department information about what's happening in the city, and are told by police officers that there isn't any reason to do so. Additionally, I frankly think that the panel owes Councilor Mejia an apology. She asked for evidence and data 3 or 4 times about the use of the gang database and why it's necessary, and was met with anecdotes from the panel every time. And then when she shared a single experience with a constituent, was told that that was not factual. To answer one of her questions that the panel was unable to answer, the Washington Post reports that white victims' homicides in Boston result with an arrest over 80% of the time, while black victims' homicides result in arrest less than 50% of the time. What all of this shows me is that BPD is seriously lacking in empathy, accountability, and efficacy. And as a result, I would like to echo some of what others have said today, that spending should be divested from the Boston Police Department and reinvested back into the community through programs designed by and led by people in our communities, particularly our BIPOC neighbors who have been disproportionately impacted by racist systems and policies within BPD. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Sparks. Next, we have Khalil.
Hello.
Hi, Khalil, we can hear you. Please state your full name and affiliation for the record, and you have 2 minutes.
Hi, my name is Khalil Howe. I live in District 7, like many of my fellow YJPU people. I represent YJPU as well as defund boss cops. I also, believe that we need to divest $120 million from the $400 million Boston police budget, including a real cap on overtime spending, invest $120 million into community mental health response, youth jobs, affordable housing, and an office for construction detail. We need to freeze all the hiring for the Boston police, no new cops, no new cadets. I've seen my neighborhood's well-being, safety, and sense of community neglected in favor of the police. I don't really understand what this obsession we have with over-policing Black and brown communities is. It's like all the money goes, like so much of this money goes into police and overtime spending, and I see like just this flood of police officers in my neighborhood, and then nothing to really elevate my community. And I feel like there's this theory that, you make the police diverse and you add like Black and brown police officers and that's gonna fix anything, when we all know that the system of police is just racist. It's always been racist. We see from city to city, nothing changes about that when you add more Black and brown police officers, when you add body cameras. There's like this amendment need that people think needs to happen to the police force when it's just a force. We need to shut down over policing. And I'm getting emotional like watching this whole thing on Zoom. I can't even say anything. I'm not next to my people. I had to stay home. My sister's sick. But it's just like, and the rudeness y'all are treating Counselor Mejia with, it was just like, like this is real life. People are affected. You have this like gang database point system where like people who are wearing the wrong colors, who are living next to people who might be in a gang or whatever, are added to it. And it's just really to build these racist narratives, these narratives that only impact Black and brown people. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much, Khalil. Thank you for your testimony. Next, we have Luann O'Connor.
Yes, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, Luann, we can.
Okay, thank you. First, I want to say thank you to Madam Chair and to the Boston City Council for hosting this meeting. I have listened to this entire session, and I am absolutely astounded, and I am ashamed to be a resident of the city of Boston at this particular time. There is no type of camaraderie, there is no type of sense of community that encompasses everyone, every single person in the city of Boston, regarding of race, color, creed, and I truly am absolutely amazed. With that being said, we're talking about taking $4 million away from the Boston police. So
Ms. Luann, are you still with us?
were running rampant on the streets of Boston. Humboldt gang, that Intervale gang,
Ms. Luann,
that took,
Ms. Luann?
Yes,
You actually got cut off at, you were ashamed of being a resident of City of Boston, and then you came back. Can you?
okay, so let me just reiterate then. I'm amazed that the criminals are still out there, the crime is getting worse, and we all know that. We all read the newspapers. Look at what's happening in downtown Boston. And yet we want to take police away. When we have mental health social workers handling issues, are the police going to escort them in there? Or are we going to arm our social workers because they're very dangerous situations that involve mental health, particularly domestic abuse? With that being said, we want to take away BRIC. 30 years ago, when the Humboldt gang, the Intervale gang, there were many, many gangs, okay, killing each other, black on black crime. The average life expectancy of a black male at that age was 25 years old. But yet we want to take away the police. I think the police are needed, and we need more police. Our communities are growing. The city of Boston is growing. And with that, for some reason, we have lost a sense of right and wrong. And BPD, community policing, is the best in the country. We're not Minnesota. Okay, BPD is the best in the country, and we need to support them. And we need to stand with the police and against the criminals.
Thank you, Ms. O'Connor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for all the, everyone who came to testify. We're going to our round three. All right. Well, take your 8 minutes and do as you please. Councilor Mejia, you have the floor.
Thank you. And sorry I had to step out. Had to replenish so I can keep on running. This runs on coffee. So thank you.
That should be a slogan, Mejia runs on coffee.
Yeah. So for first, I just, I think it's important for us to, and I've said this in other hearings, right, that, to be a woman of color, to be in this chamber uplifting the issues that so many people here in the city of Boston have talked about year after year is not easy, right? And to have colleagues and people who I respect and I see in these streets in front of me, I see this as an opportunity, right? And how do we seize this moment to really change the conversation? But in order for us to do that, we need to have the courage, right, to admit that the racial tension that exists in the city of Boston is real. And so when I ask questions about racial profiling or the things that are happening, and then I get met with resistance or dismissiveness, it is that tone, right, that people interpret and feel disregarded. And if you're doing this to me as a city councilor, right, the question is how do other people feel? And some who don't have, who are undocumented, who are afraid, who don't know how to stand up for their rights, who don't know how to show up. And so that's what I believe is one of the reasons why there's so much tension, right? And so I don't want to create the dynamic of us versus them, but at some point we need to recognize that the issues of race are real, and they show up in staffing, they show up in these streets, they show up in our protocols, our policies, and our procedures, right? They show up. And if we can't talk about them and own them, then we're not gonna have the right conversation. And so I think it's really important for us to just acknowledge that we need to get out of our own way sometimes and get real so that people can feel affirmed and heard. So, no, there's no clapping in this chamber. I'm just like, it's a violation of the decorum, but I appreciate that. But I do have a question because it was just quite interesting because I used the inappropriate terms when I was talking about the stop and frisk and all this other stuff, so sorry, my bad. But I'm just curious, and I'm not sure who would answer this, but does an officer document his or her quote-unquote reasonable suspicion when they conduct a Terry stop? Yes. They do, okay. And is this information included in the records that the BPD publishes in the FIO database?
The officer can either complete a 1-1, a report, or an FIO for a Terry stop.
Okay.
And as well for a pat frisk.
Anything else? We have people listening. You want to let people know what a Terry stop while we're here? Let's just educate the public a little bit. What's a Terry
It's
stop?
an investigative stop based on reasonable suspicion.
So it would be really helpful and I asked this question probably like 11 o'clock this morning, and I'm going to ask it again. Can someone define for me what a reasonable suspicion looks like?
I mean, I'm not sure what you're asking, man.
Do I need a translator? So what does a reasonable suspicion look like? So if somebody said, I was stopped because there was some reasonable suspicion that I was being stopped, what does that look like?
Okay, well, if we go back to the definition, it is that a crime has or is about to occur. So it could be based on a description of a suspect. If the description of the suspect is Hispanic male, red hoodie, white sneakers, and faded jeans with rips in the knee, and you're an officer and you monitor that radio call, is it reasonable suspicion that in the same area that was broadcast, and then you see someone matching that description, you go over there, you stop that person, and you talk to him? That would be a Terry stop based on reasonable suspicion. Articulable facts that are either transmitted to you from another person, or broadcast on the radio, or a bulletin, or by some means. It has to be facts, articulable facts, facts that you can express, that you use to justify or to conduct the investigative stop. Now that's a very simplistic example, but that's something that probably occurs, I would say, every day in the city of Boston. It could be a myriad of crimes. It could be a robbery, a shooting, a larceny, and a description is given. And if a person meets that description, matches that description, and is in the area that the crime occurred, that's a simplified example of a Terry stop, an investigative stop.
Thank you. I just want to know how much more time I have, Chair.
3 minutes.
So let's just follow that thread a little bit more. So, when I think about fashion, right? When I think about just like kind of how kids dress, right? Most likely, most kids are wearing ripped jeans, a hoodie. So I'm just curious, I mean, you were really specific around the red sweatshirt, but let's just, any color sweatshirt. Like, can you just kind of unpack that a little bit more? Because what I really want people to understand is like how this shows up and the correlation between why we feel over-criminalized and over-policed and racially profiled. Nora, you're shaking your head, please.
No, I'm just saying,
come on,
because
bring it.
I know what you're saying, because I think when we stop the person for reasonable suspicion, there's more than just the general thing. So there's a group of people walking with a hoodie. The officer or we have to make sure that there's something that stands out. There's a fact that we have that's going to stand out, that we can articulate of why we stop that person. We don't just stop everyone we see. So that's what we're trying to say. It's hard to describe it because every fact and every scenario is different. So, but there's something that we're looking for, something, a location, something that stands out that isn't ordinary. That's more of it. So something that's more than the ordinary. Because we know in the neighborhoods, a lot of people might have on hoodies, ripped jeans, all that. So what is the fact that we have that we can articulate why we stopped you over the 8 other people that we saw? And the officers do use that. That's where the intel comes in. That's where all those other factors come in, the radio call. Sometimes the dispatch is describing more things. Oh, they just put a bottle down. Okay, so if there's a group of people and they just put a bottle down, that's another fact, right? Sometimes the caller. So we look for more evidence before we stop them. So there is more of stuff, but it's just hard to articulate of exactly giving you an example of what it is, because it always changes.
Right. And I think to that point, there's something that we can all learn, right, in terms of education and informing the public. Everybody has the right to know what reasonable suspicion looks like and how it's showing up, so that when they become a target or a victim of it, they know what is at play. And you're shaking your head because you agree with me? Yes. Oh, you do? Let me find out you agree with me. Bring it.
Yes, ma'am. I do agree. I think law enforcement, I'm a civilian. Law enforcement is complicated. In the description that my colleague provided, I mean, think of it, if you were leaving this building right now and you were assaulted and you're calling 911 and you're giving a description of what you saw to the best of your recollection. And through the trauma of that assault, you might have limited recollection of what occurred, but that's getting relayed to an officer who's coming to your aid, and there could be multiple people that match that description. And so that could result in a number of people being stopped. One of the points that was made before by Superintendent Walcott with the phone call that you received, ma'am, was that there could have been an incident that occurred. We don't know, but there could have been an incident that led to that person being stopped for that exact reason. So I'm nodding my head yes, in the sense of yes, I think that more public education is extremely helpful in helping to articulate these things. And
I think you're coming from a perspective that the officer is stopping someone because out of some kind of malice. But the opposite is actually true. The officer is thinking, it was just a robbery. Am I letting this guy go? Am I letting this robber go? That's what's going through his mind. Now, most Terry stops or investigative stops, maybe not most, but yeah, I would say most, a fair amount, it ends after questioning and that person is released and that information is filled out in an FIO. And that's all that occurs because that person has a reasonable explanation for where he was, what he's doing, etc. So if at the end of the Terry stop, you either have probable cause to proceed with an arrest or you're going to release that person. And again, I think that people are coming at this from a point of view that cop has some malicious intent in stopping that person. And I'm telling you, the opposite is true. They're concerned about releasing a suspect or a felon or someone that's armed that could do more damage. So that's what's behind the officer's motivation. And oftentimes they are dealing with limited information because it's at night, or you're dealing with a distraught victim, or it's secondhand information. The victim calls his mother calls 911. So if you think, or you're going to assume that the police officer is always going to have every detail, that's not reality. That doesn't happen. He's dealing with a very dynamic, emerging, and oftentimes violent situation, and he's trying to piece, he or she trying to piece information together. And that's reality. That's how it occurs.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And this is the last thing that I'll say, and then I'll just stop talking. I always talk about the fact that I grew up here during the busing era, and if anybody knows what that was like, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Yes. And so I just want to name that, and I want to continue to go back to that, because whether it's our Boston Public Schools, whether it's our police department, all of these systems that have been around have been festering, right, in the racial disregard, and no one really wants to take accountability. And the only way we're going to do this is if we own it. I'm going to continue to talk about it, because that is the truth of the matter. Every single system that we're dealing with is holding on to the status quo. And we're not going to get to where we need to be if we don't recognize that. Nora.
So no, I think that's where dialogues come into play. I think that's where that community policing element of not going to call and who's there to have that conversation. Police officers with our youth, with our elderly, with our community. So it's very important when we talk about community policing and engagement, it's so we can have these meaningful conversations. And I think it's important so we can sit in a room and, you know, talk about the years and years of, just like you said, since busing, since all these things that have been festering. So we can have those conversations, but we...
Yeah, and the fact that I have to even be afraid
No,
to speak to you all about how I feel and the questions that I have speaks volumes, right? Because I know, I'm not gonna say I'm on a hit list, but I know I'm not in your favorites list, right? For some of y'all. And that is something else that I need to name. There is a hostility out there towards certain individuals who tend to be a little bit louder. And you get targeted for speaking truth to power.
Thank you, Councilman Mahir. I ask that I come back to you for closing remarks. Thank you so much. Appreciate you. Councilor Lujan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and these are my closing remarks and questions. So I think the issue with the reasonable suspicions, reasonableness in general, is that it's built on a faulty premise of defining who is defining what it means to be reasonable, right? And oftentimes, reasonable suspicion is rooted in people's individual biases and racism. And so that is the tension that we're discussing here. The reasonable man, whether it's the reasonable man standard or reasonableness, it's often built on the understanding of not BIPOC folks, of not what we understand as reasonable. And I think that's the inherent problem in our criminal legal system. And so I think the questions about, even when you define it, the definition makes sense, but its application is dependent on what you come to the space with. And oftentimes folks are coming into that space with their own bias, with their own whatever it is. And that's where the tension is. That's why I'm like, I don't like discretion sometimes, because discretion leads to individualized decisions that are often putting Black and brown folk down, right? It's a foot on the neck. And I just want to call that out. It's not as simple as just giving the definition, because if not, life would be black and white. And it's not, because there's individualized application that is rooted in racist practices. I just another question about whether for each stop, whether the FIO data that's made public, whether that reasonable suspicion is part of it. Is that also made public?
It's part of the FIO.
It's part of the FIO?
Yes.
Okay. And then just want to reiterate that I look forward to seeing the policy that comes out of BPD regarding affirming care, health care that folks receive around gender affirming health care and abortion care here in the state, in the city, which is what we have jurisdiction over, hopefully with some haste. Thank you.
Thank you. And just piggybacking off of that, I guess, you know, what exactly constitutes as like privacy policy in terms of, you know, revealing that information? And so far, have you had cases that you've revealed information to other states? That's a yes. Okay. Okay, sorry.
I think,
There's
I
an
mean,
answer.
no, you should ask.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry, ma'am, can you,
We have to have it. Councilor Lujan was asking you how we've been cooperating with other states or giving up information. And I was asking simply what constitutes as private policy, or and have you been actually giving information to other states?
we have been giving information to other states. I'm unaware of anything related to the topics that you guys have, that you've referenced.
Thank you. What percentage of the FIO stops involve Black people? Do we have those numbers? And can you, if you don't have it here, can you submit it on record?
Is that available on the dashboard?
I'm sure it could be obtained.
It's on the dashboard, they're saying it's on the dashboard.
Okay, please submit that, please.
Yep.
And so it's been found that BPD solves Black homicides cases much lower, at a much lower rate than white victims of homicide. What's being done about that, or why do we think that is?
Well, investigating homicides, we need not only the hard work and investigative steps done by the police officers, but we need cooperation. We need witnesses. We need video that will help us corroborate the information that we have. There are also people that are more cooperating than others. So I wouldn't put a number on why cases are not being solved just based on race, but I believe a lot of it takes into account of what information that we have. Some people come forward and say, yes, I saw this is the vehicle that I left. Some people come in and testify during grand jury proceedings, and then there's cases that we have where individuals do not want to get involved.
Why do you think that is in Black neighborhoods that people come forward less? Without blaming the victim, of course, to solving homicides.
They live in the community area where the crimes happen. They're afraid. That would be one of the number one things I believe. I've had personal people like, how can you protect me? How can you protect my family if I come forward? And I don't want to get involved because I have to still live here. So it all depends. A lot of it, I think, it's just people are just nervous and they're afraid. And some people do. After a time, they come in and cooperate, but then there's others that just don't want to get involved at all.
Thank you. How many BPD officers are currently sitting on the federal task force?
I believe Councilor Mejia did ask that, and I will get that answer.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Answer for you.
Okay, thank you. The BPD commissioner is required by the Trust Act to submit a report detailing their work with ICE. When will that report be available?
We submitted that to the city clerk in January, so it's an annual report. We can send you a copy of that.
Yes, please. Thank you. How can BPD, I guess, more accurately forecast overtime hours and costs? Is there any type of assessment or study around that?
We look at run rates, we look at prior year run rates. We also try to look at what special events, because we don't want to put that in our run rate for the entire year, because you don't have a special event every week, every month. So we pull those out. In some instances, it's tough to predict if there's going to be something, an unusual item that would call for a lot of police presence. But it's basically based on run rate, but a lot of times we take into consideration what the replacement cost is. Unfortunate that weighs about 46% of our total overtime costs right now.
Thank you. And just for the record, I don't remember if we asked this, but where does the money come from for BPD overtime costs or overruns?
As I understand it, we write a letter to the city auditor indicating that because we are public safety, we are allowed to go over the overtime, and we send a letter to the city auditor. My deputy director sends it annually that we are anticipating going over the cost, so it's on record.
Okay. And so how do you determine, we got the officers for each district. How do you determine what is the minimum staffing per neighborhood or district?
The district commanders determine what the minimum staffing is going to be, or minimum manning per shift. the minimum staffing for a district is determined at the department level, the human resources and the staff. And as I said before, that's been pretty consistent for 10 years.
Based on what? What do you base it on?
It's based on call volume, and it's based on historical crime data that's analyzed. And as I stated before, the mechanism for that is CompStat. However, if you don't have the manpower, which we don't have, you can't really adjust it, right? So we're kind of at that point right now. But if you're talking about an individual district and what they have on the day shift, or the first half, or the midnight shift, that is the district commander. He determines that based on the needs of his district. If he needs more service cars, that's one-man cars, because he has a series of B&Es, and that only requires one-man car. He's obviously going to have more one-man cars. If you're in a district like District 2 or 3, where there's more aggravated assaults, then obviously you're going to want more two-man cars, because it's a safer situation, and they're more apt, or they're more capable of dealing with a violent situation if there's two officers there. So again, there's no formula. It's the analysis down at the neighborhood and district level for that type of staff.
Thank you. I know that we talked about language capacity. Do we know how many officers speak a second language?
We know? We
No,
don't.
no. Can we find
I
out?
think we did a preliminary list several years ago, the HR deputy director. I'll see if we can take that list and then add, because we do collect that information at the recruit level, and add to that. It might not be 100% because they don't have to disclose that if they don't want to.
Okay, thank you. Do we know the percentage of the increased language capacity that's coming in?
Yes, I gave you those numbers, and I can leave you with a copy of coming in.
I have those numbers,
Yep.
but do we know like the full percentage of people that speak more than one language?
I can provide, I
Yeah.
have that, that's captured as part of the recruit process, so we do have that information.
I remember you gave me percentages by language, right?
Yep,
A total
yes.
number would be awesome. And then what do you project to increasing each class coming in, or what do you call them?
Recruit class.
Recruit class?
Yes.
What do you project in terms of meeting language capacity?
So we can pull for a language requirement. So last class, they get, you can explain that.
So as I understand that, I was coached a lot this year by Michael Gaskins, because this was my first year pretty much heavily involved in the recruit process. But as I understand it, is that we do take a look at our neighborhoods and what we're looking for as what we think we need for languages, and we submit that to the state when we call for the list. And the state will determine whether or not we need that list, and I don't know what their metrics is for determining whether or not we need the language list, but I think the last time that they gave us a separate language list in addition to the big list was 2019.
Okay, thank you. And so this is just a reiteration of, out of 113 contracts, you've only contracted 6 women business enterprises. And of the 6, 1 is Black. And so that's, a huge problem. And I really want to know, outside of us looking into what we can do about that, what is BPD planning to do to change that? If you can't answer, it's okay. You can submit whatever plan you have.
Well, we're working with the city and hopefully expanding that. And basically, I feel like the city's making great efforts or trying to make efforts to basically, obviously, educate the consumer. The best consumer is the most educated consumer in the sense of once they know how the procurement process works. A lot of people don't know there's a bid process. A lot of people don't know that you need to go into the city portal to submit a bid. I think that it's very key that we continue to have these vendor fairs that we've been having all along, having these, in COVID we did online. I mean, I just feel the more they know, I know that the city is planning on providing them technical assistance because we get a lot of phone calls saying I'm having difficulty getting into the portal. But I also truly believe that we're not capturing all these small businesses, woman-owned business, minority-owned business, because it's not when you sign up. I went into the portal myself and said, okay, if I do not click a button, is it going to let me go further? And it does. So I think it's something that I think the city is working on to improve that we capture the actual data of that.
Maybe going back to Menino's time when everything was required for Boston. Out of those 6, 1 Black, out of those 6, only 1 in Boston. And that's a clear distinction when we're hiring local, contracting, procuring local. But that might be a future conversation.
We would like to procure local, but I mean, again, it's really, it's based on Mass General Law, how we go out to bid. We do try everything we can to make sure that we're going down the certified list and letting those vendors know that there's a bid out there for them to bid. But until the laws change, I mean, it's the lowest bidder prevails.
Has there been any other laws in place that we did it differently?
Not that I'm, I mean, the only difference too with the lowest bid might not prevail if you go out for a request for proposal. A lot of times you might go out for a request for a proposal if you're looking for a unique service that just wouldn't be, you wouldn't want to get the lowest bid sometimes. So you'd go out for a request for a proposal and you'd want to set up an evaluation committee to see if this is the best service, because in this case, depending on what you're looking for, the lowest bid might not be the wisest choice.
Maybe you need an oversight committee of some sort of accountability. Not for you, but in terms of contracting and really helping you with that research and engagement.
I have some contraction associates, and the biggest problem is when they have to submit bids for the low bid, that some of the companies don't have the finite ability to estimate the job. And what happens is you have larger or more experienced contractors, regardless who they are, where they're from, can estimate a job by square footage or volume or whatever the case may be, and they may undercut by $1, by $10, and that's where this law comes into play, where the low bid wins the contract, and it's unfortunate. And so that's one of the aspects.
I understand. Thank you. So it's been said that like police officers are guaranteed like a certain amount of hours, 4 hours, if you're just there, like if you're just in a court appearance for 15 minutes. Is that true?
Yes, that is. Yes, that is true.
Press the button, buddy.
I did. Come on.
There you go. There you go.
I know it's wacky.
Yes, it is true, but it's done by collective bargaining agreements. So that's part of the collective bargaining.
I see. Okay, thank you. Of the top 100 paid public employees in Boston, all are either police officers or firefighters, and all make at least $275,000 per year. How are those like higher positions, or is it overtime and detail? How do you go about making that amount of money?
I think it's a combination. It's a combination of different ranks, and it does include overtime and detail, a combination of those plus your base salary.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. I think in the interest of what we're doing here and what the counselors have asked today, I preface my conversation in the second round with that we all are human beings doing a job and that people should be seen as human beings. But I'm also a mother of black sons, and it doesn't matter that their dad is a police officer. I am afraid for my son when he goes out with braids. If he asks me for braids, I'm terrified. If he asks to wear a certain hoodie, I'm terrified. I won't let him go to certain areas. I won't let him go to a certain corner store. I won't let him wear a certain type of clothes. That's a reality, right? That's trauma. That's me as a black mother in Boston. And I understand it's not as bad as other states or other cities. I understand, and we appreciate you. And whether or not you sit here with, some sort of defensive mechanism, and it's not for all of you, most of you have been amicably responding with no defensive whatever. We've tried, and I think have shown you that we understand and we want to work together. In that spirit, I think that's how we can lead Boston. But I think that it's also a reality that a lot of people, again, in anxiety-inducing, trauma-inducing jobs, tend to function a certain way because of the trauma that they've endured, and I also understand that. So I speak from my personal perspective that I forgive you for those of you today that were less than yourselves, your better selves. And yet we have a job to do, to move, to vote on a budget, to move numbers around in a way that is going to be equitable for Boston, but also that is going to be divested in services, that is going to hopefully create preventative measures for our youth in Boston. We look forward to connecting with you and communicating in terms of whether or not you're going to return to this chamber and communicating more. I would love to come in and get more insight and visit and understand more and then continue on in the chamber or work in sessions, whatever the next step is, and really understand, because I'm a fan of practical solutions. And if I don't know anything, I'm not going to say just, reduce or increase if I don't know, right? So these conversations may continue or not, and we'll let you know. Councilor Mejia and Councilor Lujan, if you have any closing remarks, you have the floor.
No, I just want to thank our public testimony and the young people that were here. I really do appreciate everyone who uplifted their voices. And I also just want to thank the men and women who every day go out and do everything that they can to take care of our families and our communities. And so I don't want you all to think that I have no gratitude in my heart for how hard you work, and it's greatly and deeply appreciated. And I think, at the end of the day, the bottom line is that I've said this: we can't blame you for things that we have done, because the City Council is responsible for approving the budget, right? So the conditions that are created, if we're not investing more and reallocating resources to address the prevention and interventions that our city needs, right? All of that, we're responsible for the mess that we keep pointing fingers on. And that includes every single city budget. So I take responsibility for 2 years in a row. And that's why this year I'm being so super once you know better, the expectation is that you do better. And that is in the spirit in which I'm navigating this particular season, knowing that I have a responsibility in making sure that I ask those questions that make everyone feel uncomfortable, including me. So I appreciate you all being here for an entire day, and I was so sorry to hear that some of you all did not get anything to eat.
They're used to it. No.
I have a fajita that I didn't finish, so if you want to come to my office, you're more than welcome to. And thank you.
Thank you, and I like to second that. Thank you to the public testimony, the youth that came. You guys are powerful. I encourage you to continue to speak truth to power, continue to advocate, continue to be bold and courageous. We appreciate you, and we hope to do right by you. Please submit your testimonies to the committee, as well as to the mayor's office and to the other councilors for consideration. Thank you so much. This meeting is adjourned.